This beating in my breast assures me that I am alive, tells me I have survived, and as such, calls me to maintain more than vigil. Each vital vibrato reminds me there is work to be done. This beating is that clarion call from my own private metronome, divinely assigned by the universe as mine. Resolute in her quest and grateful am I each dawn to know she requires more of me. For when the world would say rest, she reminds me that, like she, I must go on. Like winged birds in flight, my strength must not waver. My vision remain clear. My purpose and direction determine my destiny, for many are the snares ahead and below me. My beating heart yearns not for rest, but ushers me to new tomorrows, reassures and rejuvenates breaths and dreams tethered to ancestors who held tight despite wearied, worn, and frail, but ever faithful. These heartbeats, vibrant as ever in my soul, connect us as one.
License and registration, he can sense your aggravation.
On the head of the fallen angel.
When the world is muttering under the floorboards, stomp even louder.
Untime.
Let them know you are alive today.
Or unhum.
Did you know that your hands came with a ripple effect?
Whisper tones unraveling like silk.
Blood, sweat, and tears win by any means poetry.
Sway, look at me. Is a piece of the pie too good for me?
Some may call it rock the mic. We call it poetry.
Hello, and welcome to Sojourn with Words. I'm your host, Sistah Joy, and we're here again today to celebrate poetry, to share poetry, to discover poetry, and for me to introduce to you one of my good poetry friends. And today I'm speaking of Kathleen McCreery. I guess one would say she's a traveler, but you'll find out a little bit more about that throughout our time together here on Sojourn with Words. Of course, this is year 15 for Sojourn with Words, and we are continuing to bring excellence of the spoken word. And Kathleen McCreery is absolutely a poet of excellence. She is a world traveler. Let's start with some bio information about Kathleen. Born in Canada, so she's a Canadian citizen, moved to the US when she was 3 or 4, permanent residence, then went abroad for a year at 23 and ended up staying. Now spent most of a year in Vienna, then some years in London, 2 years in Berlin, back to London, then the Northeast. Newcastle upon Tyne, probably the longest she spent anywhere, with a number of working sojourns in 4 African countries. Then 8 years in Donegal, where she got her Irish citizenship through her granddad, now Ontario, Canada. So you see what I mean when I say the traveler. Welcome, Kathleen. Welcome to Sojourn with Words.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here. I'm delighted.
Well, we're glad that you slowed down enough to stop by. It is truly something that it fascinates me when I hear of individuals with such world travels, because as a Native American and not have it, well, a native of America, I don't mean Native American, as a native of America, I have no idea what it must be like to live in all of those countries, not just visit, because I've traveled a little, but to have lived in so many places, I'm sure affects your writing. So we're going to hear about that momentarily. But let's see, when you speak about women and poetry, how do you identify, say, for instance, the poetry of a particular region, or does your poetry really relate to women universally, or do you speak about women as opposed to rather with regard to a particular part of the country that you're residing in at the time?
Well, my poetry is quite varied in that it sometimes refers to particular struggles that are going on, and therefore I might be writing about a woman who has had to deal with a big problem in her life. There was a poem I wrote about a woman called Anwadita, who was Pakistani but born in Britain, and she lost her children through the circumstances of returning to Pakistan and then coming back to Britain. It's a long story, but the poem tells that story. So I often write about struggles that women are involved in. There are other times when one of the poems I want to read later today is actually an anthem, and it's an anthem for women all over the world. So it's quite varied. I feel as though I'm not very rooted. I remember, and sometimes that's not a bad thing. I remember meeting with the wonderful Zimbabwean writer Chenjerai Hove in Durham, and we were doing a workshop, and Chenjerai was the honored guest at that workshop. He's a marvelous writer, and he was talking about this issue of whether it's better to have your roots deep in a country or a region. He does. He did. Sadly he passed away, but his roots are very deep in the beautiful red soil of Zimbabwe. But he was talking about Durham, where we were at the time in the northeast of England, and he said, I've noticed that there are a lot of stone walls here. Who are you trying to keep in, and what are you trying to keep out?
Wow.
And then he said, sometimes, he said, I noticed that because I'm a stranger here. And sometimes it can be very useful to be a stranger and to look at the scenery and to look at life and to look at the people with fresh eyes, not objective. I won't say they're objective because you bring your baggage with you, but to look with fresh eyes. So I found that really insightful.
I totally agree. Much as what I try to do when I'm asking for critique of my poetry, I want somebody to look at it with fresh eyes, because we know when we're writing what we're bringing to the message, but it is those fresh eyes that truly see what is before one. So thank you. And now with regard to, would you consider yourself a feminist?
Oh, yes.
Okay. So you speak often of women's issues, and I know that I think there was a poem, Can You Hear the Voices of the Women? Is that maybe a poem that we'll get to hear today?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
That's my anthem.
Okay, that's the anthem. Okay, that was that. Yes, looking forward. So with regard to your poetry, chronicling perhaps your world travels, or do you tend to bring your experience and share them at these different points of sojourn that you find yourself traveling?
I think my poetry started when I was very young. I started writing poems when I was a child, and I was probably maybe 7, 8 years old. I made gifts of my poems. I've still got the little brown ring binder that I gave my mother for a gift with poems in it, and I did the same for my grandfather, and I still have those little notebooks with my childish handwriting.
Oh, lovely. Yes.
And then as I grew older, I was a teenager and I was falling in love and so on, poetry was an outlet and it was very personal. And then I abandoned it for a while because I became an actor. I worked in theater for many years, and I also became a playwright. And an awful lot of the poems that I wrote during that period were actually songs. So I was writing song lyrics for shows that I was writing. And I love music, and I love plays with music in them, and music, with songs. So a lot of song lyrics. And then I also worked with singers and wrote a few songs which have been recorded, which were song lyrics again. So then as I got older, I had a daughter, and acting was not something that was easy to do with a very young child. So I turned more and more to writing, and I became a playwright. And I had always written plays,
So we're just going to use the term Renaissance woman. You just can't, you do it all. You bring it all to the fore. How wonderful is that? Do you have a sense of being a Renaissance woman, of bringing all the art forms through, they channel through you?
I would say that I very much work in the performing arts. And so it's been theater for me. And I've done a little tiny bit of film. I did work as a journalist, and I worked for Canadian Broadcasting in London and so on. So I have many, there are many talents and skills that I do not possess. I've never been good with my hands, so I was very good at drawing within the lines when I was a child, coloring within the lines, but I'm not good with my hands. There's many things. I used to doggedly go to dance classes when I was young, because I knew that as a performer I really ought to be able to dance. But again, not one of my talents. So I would say I'm an actor, I'm a writer, and I'm a theater director. So that's where I have primarily focused. And I did work as a journalist, and I enjoyed that. I also taught, and I love teaching and love sharing my experiences and skills with younger people and with older people too. And I've worked with people of all ages, from tiny ones, toddlers really, right up through to seniors, and had a wonderful time doing it, and learned an enormous amount from facilitating and sharing and workshopping.
And I understand that you even worked as a counselor, as an artist in residence during your time in Cleveland, and you edited an anthology. Tell us about that experience.
Yes, I was the artist in residence in 2000 for the National Health Service in Cleveland in the northeast of England. And I had the enormous privilege of working with outpatients actually at a local hospital. These were women who had all suffered from severe depression. They had all attempted to take their lives at various stages. And I was very uncertain as to whether writing was going to be something that they would want to do. At the first session, one woman had to sit near the door for fear that she was going to have a panic attack and run out. Another woman was sitting with her head almost between her knees and wouldn't look at me, wouldn't make eye contact. And I thought, oh, this is a disaster. This is never going to work. But surprisingly, they came back for the second workshop, and it went from there. And I worked with them for 18 months, and it was a joy. By the end of those 18 months, these women were performing in public, performing their work in public. And one woman had been placed in a national competition for people who had experience of mental health issues. And her work was exhibited, and it was a triumph for the whole group. They all felt that they had won because one of their own had won. So that made me decide, it was so, creative writing worked so well. They said it was the best therapy they'd ever had. And it made me think that I really should take this seriously. And I knew that I was sometimes not very well supervised, and I wasn't always sure what I was doing. And I thought I really should study a bit of counseling. So I did an introductory course, and that led to a certificate for a year, and that led to the 2-year diploma, and I ended up becoming a counselor.
Wow. So art guided you academically even. Okay. So let's see. I also know that you're writing a novel. Tell us a little bit about the novel.
I've been working on this for many years. My husband and I, my first husband, I have two, or I've had two. My first husband and I wrote a book called Theater as a Weapon, and we explored theater in the 1920s and 30s in Germany, the Soviet Union as it then was, and Britain. And in the course of the research, we came across an extraordinary woman called Ella Schlieser. And she was an actress in Berlin in the 20s and 30s in the workers' theater movement. And she was extraordinary and had an extraordinary life. And I started to research, and I met people who knew her and interviewed them, and became absolutely fascinated with her life. And I began to collect material and so on. Sadly, she was Jewish and she was political. And in the Germany in the 1930s, that was not a good situation to be in. So she went to Prague, where she was an activist in the resistance, and then to Paris, where again she was active in the resistance. She was actually one of those brave souls who tried to recruit soldiers who were serving in the Wehrmacht, in the German army, who were occupying Paris. That was one of the most dangerous forms of resistance, because you could imagine, you speak to the wrong person and that's it, they've got you. And she was picked up very early and sent to Auschwitz. She survived Auschwitz, but sadly, she took her life after the war. This was just such a remarkable story, and I wanted to write about it, but I decided I didn't want to write a straight biography. I decided to try to write faction, I suppose you could call it, which is fact married with fiction. I was inspired by Schindler's Ark and Schindler's List and the great novel by Thomas Keneally, and then the film that was made. And I saw that and I thought, oh, that's how I can do this. So that's what I'm trying to do. It's a slow process because I have to get the history right, and I also have to get the fiction right.
Okay, well, we wish you all the best with that.
Thank you.
I look forward to staying in touch and finding when it's ready for public. So please keep us posted. I hope our viewers have enjoyed our time just getting inside the mind and heart of such a fabulous world-traveling poet. Kathleen McCreery, for those that might have joined late, is our guest here on Sojourn with Words. As you know, we present the best of the best. And Kathleen, thank you so much for this time of interview. What we'd like to do now is to hear some of your poetry. So we're going to transition, as it were, and see how much poetry we can fit into our remaining time together right here on CTV with Sojourn with Words. And thank you so much for meeting our guest and sharing your wonderful tale of travel and intrigue, literally, and as a sister feminist who is trying to make inroads through poetry, I thank you, I salute you, and now I listen to you share your poetry.
Thank you. Can you hear the voices of the women? Can you hear the voices of the women above the clamor of computers firing off form letters to all the dear sirs in the land? The munching of machines gobbling up raw cotton like there was no tomorrow? The SOS of dishes drowning in a grease-filled sink? Can you hear the voices of the women above the whoosh of waters breaking and the uncertain beating of a fetal heart? Above the everlasting agony of babies with 3-month bloody colic? Above the noise of little boys demanding food and football kits and me first, and now isn't he the spitting image of his father? Above the silence of the daughters who've discovered on the school bus Mother Eve's an outcast? Can you hear the voices of the women above the whistles from the curbs that crawl with packs of itchy urban wolves in jeans and leathers, through the walls that leak the smack of fists on flesh, cracking ribs, blacking eyes, breaking promises and jaws and spirits? Can you hear the voices of the dead and buried women, thin as smoke above the roar of Inquisitor, and the flames which snapped and licked and leapt, melting the wisdom of ash-white witches? Above the flute which called the tune for tiny dancing feet, bound back on themselves, trailing blood and lotus blossoms? Above the whisper of the pages when a writer's name was exorcised and replaced with a man's? Can you hear the sweet, strong voices of the young women of Pakistan above the bullets of the Taliban? Shh, listen. They are opening their books, reading aloud, speaking at the UN. Can you hear the voices behind the balaclavas of the brave Russian women, above the clang of prison gates, the screams of convicts driven mad by beatings, lack of soap and sleep? Listen, their peaceful protest, their punk prayer, still echoes round Moscow's Cathedral of Christ the Savior, appealing to the Holy Virgin to chase Putin out. Can you hear the voice of the Saudi woman sentenced to 200 lashes for the crime of being raped? Listen, they are counting their cash, the business as usual, bankers and oil men, the democratically elected prime ministers and presidents shaking hands and smiling with her torturers. Can you hear them? The voices of the cradle rocking, vicar shocking, wedding marching, collar starching, kitchen mopping, karate chopping, burger frying, airplane flying, low pay earning, bugger it's burning, channel swimming, can't I'm slimming, time clock punching, chocolate munching, taxi driving, late arriving, tatey peeling, Virginia reeling, trolley pushing, children shushing, mountain climbing, silly rhyming, cocktail shaking, history making, tennis playing, baby weighing, toenail clipping, red wine sipping, bingo calling, overhauling, poultry plucking, nip and tucking, opera singing, highland flinging, storytelling, heather selling, marathon running, backyard sunning, salad dressing, mother confessing, guitar strumming, conga drumming, soapbox thumping, parachute jumping, women.
Oh, how lovely.
Thank you. I thought it might be fun to read an excerpt from one of my plays. And this is the opening scene from a play I wrote for schools called Hot Potato. It was produced by Cleveland Theatre Company in the UK, and it deals with the issue of waste, which is pretty topical, and its effects on the environment. And for those who don't know, the Tees is a river. Now, it begins with the three actors inside bins, rubbish bins, when the children enter. And there's a gradual buildup of noise at first, just a rustle, a whisper, or a sigh. And as the noise grows, the bins begin to shudder and shake and move until a crescendo is reached and the performers pop out. Let me, let me, let me, let me out. This bin I'm in ain't cozy, it's crammed with waste. I'm faced with a box of old fish fingers and a smell that really lingers. Who's been drinking beer? Who's left their bubble gum in here? Pop, 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 pop bottles. There were 99 bottles filling up the hall, so we said to the dustman, you can have them all. There's me old Fast Forward fan magazines. There's last year's pair of trendy jeans. There's a ton of plastic carrier bags and a rotting pile of oily rags. Throw them out. Who's been sitting in Baby Bear's chair and broke it? Throw it out. Who's used up all the spray from the hair? It's empty. Throw it out. There's newspaper, kitchen paper, toilet paper. Please, there's wrapping paper, writing paper, paper for a sneeze. When we run out of paper, we'll cut down some more trees. Throw it out and buy a new one. You want the latest model? You want the latest sounds. So long as you keep spending, the world keeps turning round. And as the manufacturer of the latest completely useless, built to break into little plastic pieces as soon as you touch it, teenage mutant fashion accessory, I'm laughing all the way to the bank. Shall I wrap it before you scrap it? What a tip. It's a tip, all right, the tip of the iceberg. It's not just plastic and packaging, it's pesticide and paint, asbestos, disinfectants. Stop it, I feel faint. There's heavy metals, chemicals with complicated names. There's solvents and sewage sludge pouring down the drains. Industry's been dumping it straight into the T's. We fouled up the beaches and mucked up the seas. We're running into trouble and we're running out of space. And we're all going to lose the great rubbish race.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Thank you, thank you, thank you for that. What a treat. Thank you. Okay. Wow. It's almost like, where do we go from here? Okay, so we have just a little bit more time with Kathleen. Maybe you can give us one more poem?
One more, okay. I worked in Ghana, in Africa, with street children, and I went 2 years running and worked with Street Child Africa. And there was a refuge where the street children were. And then there was a sister organization called Street Girls Aid. And with the two organizations, we made plays. And the plays were based entirely on their lives and their stories and their experiences. We had an exhibition afterwards, and this was a play I wrote about the final performance of the street children. It's called Last Day, after the performance by the street children of Catholic Action for Street Children Refuge and Street Girls Aid, Accra, Ghana. We made it. Hunger and heat cracked concentration. Fatigue nibbled at brains and bodies, but we made it. Friends banged on the glass, burst in, ripped up rehearsals, but we made it. The street still whispered, but we did not give in. Day after day, we turned up, more or less on time. We sifted through the shadows, pulled out pictures from our stories, let the people in them speak, strung their words together, beautiful as beads. And we made it, this proud play. Now applause lifts us from the balcony at Street Girls Aid. We leap, hug, laugh, dance, yell. Faces too small for our smiles. We made it.
Faces too small for our smiles. Oh, what a line. How can you not smile after hearing that line? Thank you so much, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Kathleen McCreery is our guest here on Sojourn with Words. I hope you've enjoyed having her as your guest on Sojourn with Words, because I most certainly have. I hope that we have some of your contact information. I believe we will have that available for viewers online. And please do stay in touch. And viewers, if you'd like to be in touch with Kathleen, contact her through her website, email address, or whatever is made available through Sojourn with Words. We want to make sure that we're on target and we're on point. So let us know what you feel about Sojourn with Words. You can certainly reach me on Facebook, Sistah Joy, and of course email poetsistahjoy@aol.com. We're just going to celebrate poetry whenever and however we can. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you CTV for hosting Sojourn with Words for 15 years.